Okay, so in this video I will show you two different ways to define your surfaces manually and semi-manually. So when you have such a data set, it can be quite complex to let the program decide automatically where the signal belongs to what cell. So you might want to do the job yourself. So in order to do that, let's start with the semi-manual or semi-automatic way. You will first use a surface object and then import it into a new cell object. So let's start. So as always here it could have been a good idea to refine a bit the dataset by doing some filtering and maybe resampling. We will stick with what we have right now and see if it works good enough. So let's turn on the two channels here to have roughly an idea where the cells start and where they stop. Okay, so I will keep the green signal here and let's move on. So what we will do is create a surface object and then divide it manually. So in order to do that, you use the surface wizard as always. Here let's see with the default parameter how it looks like. So it's quite grainy, but at least it's detailed. You can switch off the volume to have a better idea. I think we can safely increase a bit the smoothing factor here. Maybe let's try 0.08. Yeah, it's a bit better. Because we do not want to have too many small objects layering around. We will clean up afterwards anyways, but I think it might be a good idea to start with a with a good shape. So now we can apply our filtering to keep only the large objects here, and we will do additional cleanup afterwards. Classify, yes, we could classify this, but here let's just move on and finish. So this happens because I didn't switch off the classification of the surface. So now that we have this unique object, which we can see by just clicking on it to select it, we have to separate it into its different components. So let me just switch this off for a moment. So we have obviously one cell here that is roughly defined by this curve here. So let's try to create this object. So in order to do that, I will use the edit tool here, and I will use the cut feature, cut surface feature. So to do that, I have to position myself vertically, because there is only one cut line that will be drawn. Let me show you. If you click on Shift and click on the object, you see the blue line is the line that will cut my object. So let's position it here. So everything that is along this blue line will be cut. So obviously there will be parts that we do not want to have to be cut, but this doesn't matter at the moment because we can correct this afterwards. So once the cut line is positioned properly, we can just select our object so it's a bit more visible here. We just click on cut surface. And now we have two separate objects here. I mean the main objects. Obviously here we have small ones also, but we will deal with this later on. Now let's try to cut it along this axis here. So we could multiply the cut lines like this. Let's cut this again, and let me just check with the object how it looks like. Yeah, I think this might be safe. So we have one object here, and let's say this is our first cell. So how do we deal with those many parts now? Well, we can just bring them back together by using Control and click here, sorry, and then select everything we want to bring back together and click here to unify. So now we have one object here and another one here. We still see the cut lines here, but this doesn't matter that much. So next object will be, if we switch off the volume, the surface again, here, I would say probably we should cut around here and around here. So you see, the trick with this approach is that you have to position the volume correctly here before doing anything useful. So shift click to position the cut line here. Let's cut the surface again. I would probably, if I want to be more precise, shift click to cut this small part also, like this. And now here we have to cut along this axis here. And then we will have to stick everything back together to make separate objects. So shift click and cut surface here. And now this object has to be cut. Let me see. Yeah, probably along here, this line. Something like this. Cut surface. Okay. So now let's put the pieces back together. So Control click. So, and this will be our second cell. So unify, and this will be our third cell, unify. So now we have three different objects, and we can refine this a bit further by cutting maybe the small branches if they are not relevant. But I mean, this is one way to deal with such a complex object. So the other way is to do it completely manually. So in order to do that, I really need to see a bit better my volume. So let's just reset the view here, center it like this, and let's create a new surface here. And this time let's skip again the automatic creation to edit manually, and we will draw here the cell contour. So there are several modes to do that. So one that I like is the distance mode, because it will draw points evenly across all the slice. So let me show you how it looks like. So here I just want to switch off my volume, so I just see the current slice here, and I can change the slice position with this slider here. And if I see something relevant where I want to start drawing, I can lock the slice into position, so when I click inside the data sets, it's just rotating and not moving the slide back, because if I do not do this, if I click here, I can change the slice position. So it might be convenient, but not when you want to draw. So let me just lock it in place here. And now using this mode here, the distance mode, I go back to board and I select draw. And now I will start at this position, and now I just move my mouse along the limits of what I consider to be the cell. So I can be a bit more precise than before, but this is also quite empiric, and you have to be quite careful because you will introduce bias. So at the end, when you start to overlap the starting point here, it will close the line, and you can move on to the next slice. So I will not do them all, but you get the idea here. So something like this. Next slice. So using this distance tool, it's quite fast because you just have to hover around the object. I find it really convenient. Like this. Okay. So now, before we create the surface, you can review all our slices here. And depending on the way you work here, you might want to turn off the other lines when you are going, for instance, the first slice here. So it's maybe easier to complete if you don't want to do it. So for instance here, if I missed a slice, I can here do the contour like this. So here I really don't know where the cell starts and where it stops. It's a bit difficult to decide. So I will do something like this, but it's an approximation. And let's finish here. So here we can see some branches, and those are very fine structures. So we will also have to change one additional parameter here to make sure they are not lost when we do the reconstruction. Here in the resolution part of this panel, we have to switch to manual and make sure we increase the size of the resolution here of the object, and make sure so we preserve features, we make sure they are not smoothed out. So when we do this now, we can click here on create surface. So it takes a bit of time since the resolution is quite high. but that's precisely what we want. And then eventually, hopefully, we will get our object. Once the object is created, we can redo the same procedure to build up the next cell and so on. So if I finish here, go back to the object mode, surface mode, now we can see we have defined manually our cell. So if we compare to what we had here, so this was the automatically drawn object, and this is the manual drawn object. So two different approaches, but I think they are quite complementary. If the objects are well separated, you might want to go faster by just using this way of working. And if it's not the case and it's more complex, you might want to do this completely manually. One last addition to this short video here is that you can, when you have done such an object, import it as a surface into a cell. So let me just quickly show you what I mean. I will quickly create a new surface, but this time for the nuclei. So we have several nuclei layering on here. So let me just quickly create the same way, so semi-automatic way, some surfaces. So here we go. So when we have this new surface here, let me just rename this for clarity, nuclei. Don't want to classify them. We will use the DAPI channel. We don't need background subtraction. Let's smooth this a bit more. Something like this. We don't know to split them, but what we want to do is exclude some of them. So here we have only the option to exclude them by distance from image border. This is nice, so we can just keep the two center parts here. Okay, so we now have two nuclei, and we have a manual object and a surface, automatic surface object. And with this, we can create a new cell object and skip the automatic creation and edit manually. And to do that, I will import a surface to the cell. So let's use our manually drawn cell here and import as cell. Press OK. And import now the nuclei and import as nuclei. Here we go. And we can display this as a volume. We can just hide this for the moment. And so now we have a new cell object that has been defined really manually with all the usual statistics available here. So we can have detailed measurements if we want to, cytoplasm and the ratios and so on. So here you go. Bye bye.